Welcome to our stream here. Give me just a second. I got to make sure that everything's streaming all right, and then we will get to chatting you all up.
All right. We'll try not to bum you out too much with the subject matter. It's serious stuff. There are
Definitely.
thoughts to be had. It's a worthwhile problem to address.
It is, and it's something. It's something ordinary people don't talk about enough, and it's something we on the podcast haven't been able to talk about enough either. So
it is a taboo subject with a lot of feelings attached. Yeah.
while I'm thinking about it, everybody, if you could take a minute to like, subscribe, and share this video with other people, it would be very much appreciated.
And make sure to do whatever you want and not take any shit.
That too. That is definitely that too. Okay. So the subject for today is veteran suicides and active duty suicides as well. Pretty much anybody who has served in the global war on terror era, if we want to call it that. We're going to read through the report that the Watson Cost of War Institute at Brown University did recently and try to unpack this a little bit. I'm planning to read the whole thing. We may skip a little bit here or there if it's somewhat of the same information. But, going through each page, I was like, all of this needs to be talked about and shared with people. So here we are to share it and to try to extend that conversation a little bit. Before I do that, though, I would like to introduce my co-streamer for this evening, my good buddy. He is going by Little Boots, so that will be his moniker for talking here, and I hope that he'll join us again at other points. But brother, thank you for being here with me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. Let's go.
Alrighty. So okay, here we go. High suicide rates among United States service members and veterans of the post 9/11 wars. Thomas Suit from Boston University wrote this one. I do plan on trying to get in touch with him and asking him a few questions. Suicide rates among the United States public have been increasing for the past 20 years. But among active military personnel and veterans of the post 9/11 wars, the suicide rate is even higher, outpacing average Americans. The quote-unquote post 9/11 wars refers to ongoing U.S.-led military operations around the world that grew out of President George W. Bush's global war on terror and the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. This paper estimates that 30,177 active duty personnel and veterans of the post 9/11 wars have died by suicide, significantly more than the 7,057 members killed in post 9/11 war operations. So I think we all should just sit with that for just a second. That the tally of dead in terms of the actual people that fought in the wars or died of accidents while they were fighting overseas. And it's also important that to remember that this report doesn't include contractors. That American contractors have died. A significant portion of them have died. I don't have the specific numbers right now, but it's important to understand that they're probably in those same communities. Most of those contractors are from the military, in one way or another, usually. But we don't usually count them. We don't count their deaths in the same way that we count service members' deaths, and I think it's important that we do that.
Go on.
These high suicide rates are caused by multiple factors, some inherent to fighting in a war, and others unique to America's war on terror framework. Partially, they are due to risks common to fighting any war, high exposure to trauma, stress, military culture and training, continued access to guns, and the difficulty of reintegrating into civilian life. In the post 9/11 era, the rise of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, the attendant rise in traumatic brain injuries, TBI, the war's protracted length, advances in medical treatment that keep service members in the military longer, and the American public's disinterest in the post 9/11 wars have greatly contributed to increased suicide rates.
And how about the casus belli for those wars completely falling apart? There's a while where you could be in the army or a veteran and still pretend like we weren't being lied, like there
Mhm.
was some justification to that, but there's not.
No.
If people have a hard time with aliens, they might have a hard time accepting that they were that deeply misled. Have we ever known so overtly, us army folk or military folk in a illegal war? Have we ever known so obviously that it didn't have a leg to stand on within a decade? I don't think, like, when did it become impossible to believe invading Iraq?
Like that it was a good thing.
Yeah,
Well,
because we haven't dealt with that as a country.
No.
There's a serious problem with swearing an oath to be serving your country, not serving your country, and what has one involved themselves in over there thinking that somehow the ends justify the means. Anywho, I think that's missing from this little list, that we're faced with a divided country and impossible. It's hard to imagine that we're serving our country. It's more lines of unprosecuted criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Up to the Barbie version of the veteran. And, well, I guess some people can live in that for a long time, but it's not real.
No.
Anywho.
No, I think that this little section doesn't really draw that out too much. A little bit later in the report, they do talk more about the political and social costs in that way, it
I
must
think
be
of
pointed
little
out.
girls. Oh, sorry, go on. I mustn't interrupt.
Sorry. That as Americans we have this veil, and when you're a veteran, the veil changes a bit, but it's not that different. But what happens is that if you drop out of that area, if you drop away from maybe a community or a group that is more accepting of the damage, just that we have to fight these wars, we fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here, that kind of bullshit. And at a certain point, it becomes something that you swear to, almost as if people are swearing to Jesus or another religious figure. And there's so much news these days that pokes in that veil, that and you see it a little bit in some of the Fox News crowd, um, how easy it is for their perception to say, and we keep saying things are anti-American or un-American. That's been, one of the new things. Is what a lot of people said about Trump. But Trump is, as grotesque as he is, he's inherently American. He fits right into the mold of the people that we're talking about here. Um,
Uh,
but these days, it's too hard. It's too hard to hide. I think it's
I
becoming
think
harder to hide.
people's loyalty has been manipulated into kind of their hate for the other side,
Hmm.
kind of this addiction to hypocrisy that is eroding the Constitution one miscarriage of justice at a time. I was going to say I think of the little girl community. I understand that their suicide rate has been alarmingly on the increase, and they're also pressured to be something perhaps they can't.
Hmm.
The culture says a woman is this thing, a culture says a veteran is this thing, and oh, by the way, you're kind of expected to shoot a place up or off yourself. um, we're not expected to be a danger to tyranny,
No.
which is we are. And I think we're a target of tyranny. Next. Next paragraph, I guess.
Alrighty. Army Sergeant Dominic McDaniel was a forward observer in the infantry division for 7 years. Wow, sentence was messed up. As
In
a
the infantry division. Yeah, a civilian wrote this,
yeah,
huh?
we have the Army has one infantry division, and you're it, son. Um,
Let's not be snobs about it. Okay.
okay. As a sister or a fister, an acronym, the fister, his job was to quote remain as calm as possible and drop accurate bombs on enemy target locations, end quote, using his expertise in land navigation and logistics to ensure the safety of his fellow infantrymen. While technically in a support role, he often found himself deep in the combat zone on foot with light infantry looking for enemy combatants. In 2005, he advanced to squad leader in Sadr City, Iraq, with a group of young soldiers now in his care. In a quote unquote extremely bloody time, McDaniel felt it was his job to keep them safe. When members of his squad, including the youngest member of his battalion, were wounded in combat, he felt immeasurable guilt. McDaniel recalled, quote, a couple guys got hurt, and essentially I prayed and I asked God for help. And at the end of that, I felt that no one was coming and it was up to us. And it was a very alone, isolating feeling for sure. And I don't know if that went away after that.
Yeah, that's when apathy starts. Yeah.
An IED explosion left McDaniel with physical and mental wounds that eventually forced him to resign after a pre deployment assessment flagged him unfit for combat with a combined traumatic brain injury and PTSD diagnosis. The Army told him to put in his disability claim, and just like that, his military career ended. McDaniel's transition back to civilian life was a terrible time. Quote, I isolated. I felt guilty because my guys got hurt and I was in charge. It was my fault. They started committing suicide when we got home pretty quick.
Yeah.
Medically discharged, the loss of his brothers in arms and his overwhelming guilt led to alcohol abuse, divorce, and a feeling of cascading betrayal. At his lowest, Sergeant McDaniel fortunately found useful resources for depression and suicidal ideation. Unfortunately, many of those in his battalion could not continue to cope with their traumas. He revealed that while his unit lost 9 people in Iraq, 15 have taken their own lives since leaving the service. Now more people from my unit have committed suicide than died in combat, he said. I feel that because of that, it made me reflect on what we went through, where we were at, how our role in the war has caused some of the extreme chaos in the minds of fellow soldiers. It really kind of strips your humanity and soul away, war does.
Well, and what were we psychologically prepared for?
Mm-hmm.
And then what did we actually deal with? I think we lost our hearts and minds there in the process of living through the bullshit. I mean, facing grave, important things, death, for nothing. I felt rather outnumbered in the time after I was in college and whatnot. It was maybe, I don't want to say Kafkaesque. It was hard to be among military people who were still believing the bullshit. I was a cadet for a time in college, and there, I don't want to be disruptive to anyone's ability to function in the army. So I still don't want to talk to, like my sister-in-law, say, I don't want to disrupt her ability to serve in
Sure.
this if she's still able to. She is, and she is. It is its own little worlds, kind of like academia or the hospital world of doctors and nurses. You can do good things there. Anywho, excuse me.
No, it's all good. Going back to something we talked about a little bit before we started streaming about the COVID factor. That COVID, there's been a pretty sizable increase in suicides both over the Trump years and since COVID has been a thing. And the military, it makes you go and go and go and go, and then suddenly you stop, for different reasons. If you have to go on leave, if you're out of the military, and being injured and happen to be in a I'm not sure what warrior transition unit, is that what they call them now? If guys um, they end up getting sent there and they try to kill some before they get out, I guess. Um, but it can be very, very isolating. The military keeps you busy. It always keeps you doing things. So going into a period of being forced to quarantine, to do less, and for some people it could be a good time for them to spend some time with their family. But I would imagine for many of them, especially the combat veterans, that it is a somewhat of the quiet before the storm, because the quiet period allows those things to shift forward in our psyche that we were pushing to the back out of a survival instinct, or trying to get home from the deployment, whatever it happens to be.
Dehumanizing the enemy is a thing. It's a necessary thing. Or like doctors might tell jokes about horrific things to deal with the fact that it's necessary for them to be exposed to life and death. If you need to kill a person, you're gonna have to dehumanize them. But was it worth it? Is it real? Can you dehumanize them?
Yeah.
Does it stand the test of time? And I think that at this point, we can't pretend that it does. with all the like the slang words used in Vietnam and whatnot, and the racism, there's a function for othering the enemy.
No,
But what if we're the monsters?
but it's, some people may be simple enough that switching that off maybe is easier for them or easier to deny. Um, but they do.
Yeah,
They train soldiers to fire, to pull the trigger
yeah,
when they're supposed to,
yeah.
and we're given no training on the way out to deal with that. You're sent to ACAP, which is Army career type stuff. They teach you how to make a resume. But in terms of, I'm leaving this very tight knit community that I did very specific things with, and I'm not going to have the same support that I did before. And I'm supposed to just keep going. I'm supposed to get a job. I'm supposed to um, move into places, where that like being a cop. How many veterans become cops, and how often is their humanity poked at in question in that way? But if you're already used to pulling the trigger, they've actually proven it, statistically speaking, that cops that are veterans have an easier time using deadlier force,
And
and using
they
deadly
can go
force.
back into a world of us versus the other.
They can. They
Um,
absolutely can.
there's room for that, and we need that of cops in a way to hold them. There's a lot of problems, obviously, but a best case scenario cop isn't. I don't want to see or be treated by him as a human or be vulnerable as a human. Um, yeah, there's room for good and bad there. But it's a place for a veteran to go and maintain that kind of mindset.
Mhm.
Maybe not ever really deal with it. I feel like until our country really deals with how it is we really ended up over there, where people, veterans are just going to be left on their own to slap band-aids on it to maintain that world.
Definitely. There's a footer note here that I'd like to share. At the outset, I wish to note this article focuses at length on the ways service members and veterans face hardship and mental illness that may lead to suicide. The veterans emphasized here represent an alarming and significant portion, but non majority, of service members and veterans. I do not wish to reinforce stereotypes of veterans that mark them as, I can never remember how to say it. It's
Prima
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 facie,
facie.
broken or dangerous people. I agree with that. I'm glad that they mention it so that it's clear. That they're the
Yeah.
swinging wildly to the left or right in terms of if someone is, are all veterans broken, um,
And if
and that
someone is lost, might they conform to the projection, not knowing where else to put themselves? Yeah, it's a good point. I'm glad that they
and
address that.
the thing that I would mention here is that this is trying to poke at, um, hold on, let me get my thought together here. We don't want people to assume all veterans are broken, but how do we accurately measure the damage done to a veteran if we're not analyzing it in that way? I mean, people need to be willing to ask the question and not have the obvious answer. I meet someone, he's a veteran, oh, he served in Iraq. I wonder about this, but don't assume. Don't assume, because you don't really know what their service may have been.
Yeah.
Some people deal with it easier. Some people have better mental health when they join, or their family is more supportive and they're able to deal with it. Some people are deeply religious, and their religious belief helps deal with some of that. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, and I don't want people to look at veterans as if they are broken, but I do want them to understand we're willingly doing this to fellow human beings, our children, no less. And I say that
Right.
like an 18-year-old who raises their right hand is still a child, and they're not, but they are in a lot of ways. Like
Oh
men,
yeah.
our brains don't fully develop until 25. And
Yeah.
so that leaves us, that we're still learning all of those things, and more than that, we're learning about ourselves. We're learning about what happens to me when I get really, really angry. Do I scream at people? Do I grind my teeth? Do I, we're going through these motions, and it's those reps that end up teaching us about who we are. But if you go in right at 18,
Yeah.
how do you have the chance to develop any of that absent of the military? You're going to latch on to whatever the military has done
Right.
because it's what you know, because it's what's kept you together.
And
Um,
it's why it's so important that our country not misuse these, because I think it's hard to compete with the reaction time
mhm.
of that age, and other armies we're up against, we're going to be up against, well, the kids. Yeah, kids fight, and it better be worth it. I was a kid. I was 19 years old. um, I think it's I think it's probably more natural when it comes to the evolution of our brain. We should have all experienced death by the time we are 18. Not in the way we modern man lives, but in the evolution of our species.
Mhm.
I think that trauma and that kind of loss is that there's a critical period in the development that we're skipping, and we live in this artificial glorification of violence and whatnot, and the propaganda of war movies, and not quite prepared to deal with real, not on TV, real hardship. But I do think it's totally within an 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old's capacity. I think it's a good usage to have them in the military, but they certainly can't consent um, like an adult. They can't,
They can't
but we still
comprehend
need
what's
them.
happened to
It's
them.
why it needs to be important, worth it.
And that brings up another question: is can the controllers of the military, can the people that drive its use do anything about that? Is that I don't see our country ever being at a point where I'm going to trust the leadership with our military. I'm going to say you're doing the absolute right thing. Now, if I see 10, 15, 20 years of them going to help with humanitarian disasters and dealing with climate change, and a whole bunch of our guys end up coming home, I might feel just a scotch different. But right now, there's no one who wears the moniker of being connected or in charge of the military, most especially the president, that I would trust to make those calls, to take those innocent lives that
Right.
could have gone in a different direction, away from violence, away from war. I don't trust that they're going to do that.
Yeah.
That um,
Yeah, you can't. It's like kind of not possible right now. So it's it's a different mentality, I'd say, to join the military right now. Like, what are you consenting to based, uh, as opposed to 20 years ago when we're joining? We've got this understanding that we're being fed, and it's tied to a national tragedy. And it's the same year as I remember my Pearl Harbor moment. It's when Pearl Harbor came out earlier in 2001. We were being programmed. Band of Brothers comes out. We're being prepared to do the necessary,
Hmm.
but it wasn't necessary.
No, no. And that's one thing about studying World War II that's really important, is that there was a point in that conflict where our country did go in the right direction for what we needed it to do. There was a fight that needed to be had. Exactly how we did that is a different question. But
Right.
there's also the fact that that, like, the early Nazi Party was supported by financial contributions from wealthy Americans, lots of wealthy
Yeah.
Americans back in the day. So in terms of America causing this, yes, we really got our foot in the fucking fire right there.
Well,
Uh,
we were going to come out on the winning side, and
Absolutely.
emerge the hegemon and remain there. That's what we got out of World War II.
No, that
I think.
that was absolutely what our goal was, exiting the war. But the point
Yeah.
I'm trying to drive after is that there is a segment of the understanding about fighting a war too, which is explainable, which is makes sense. I get why we have to do it, but absent you put in almost all the other wars, when has our country responsibly chosen to sacrifice our kids that we send into the military? And I don't
Right.
other than that sliver of World War II, which still has its own addendums to it. There isn't one. We can't look at, you look at almost any other conflict, and it was
Yeah.
simply about American hegemony. Not
Right.
It wasn't a self-defensive act. It was
Right. But
usually
I'd imagine at least the propaganda held up a little longer. Maybe it took a few decades for a
true.
service member to notice that, oh, that was, yellow journalism. That was obviously bullshit. But in this new age of information going
Yeah,
immediately, um, our propaganda machines, our misinformation machines aren't doing the job because I'm not
no,
buying it. And that's going to cite whether what someone believes or not is true. Well, it helps if it doesn't fall apart. I think
yeah,
if it's sustainable. Um, it might be a little unrealistic to hope for an actual just war, but
true.
can we at least believe it? Um, I mean, we're not programmed to be the bad guys. We're programmed to be
No,
the good
no.
guys. It seems to me. Okay, shall we continue?
Sure, sure, sure. Okay.
And did I see
Sergeant.
someone made a comment? A
Oh yeah.
Deborah flash up?
No, it was right here. I'll throw it up again. From Deborah. Not only are the human costs unspeakable, the opportunity cost is enormous. We lost the opportunity to do good rather than evil.
Yeah,
Absolutely, Deborah. I could
yeah.
agree with
And
that.
we thought we were the good guys.
We did. We did. We absolutely did. And that's something that we're going to have to stomach as climate change gets worse, because there's going to be times that
Hmm.
we're like, our military should be dealing with coastlines that are eroding, not
Like
neighboring
China
area.
planting a bunch of trees and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, no, that we're not we're that
We've
it
been
actually
using it
is our
offensively.
survival. Um,
Yeah.
but I
But
don't.
I feel like our military, in a way, has been under attack from within, in its misusages, in its abuses. Um, it's taken a toll on the population.
Absolutely, it has. All right. Army Sergeant McDaniel now works for a nonprofit helping other veterans who have experienced severe trauma in peer-to-peer settings. He spends his time counseling veterans who, as he once did, struggle with personal crises and feelings of hopelessness. His experiences are not rare. Sergeant McDaniel's experiences represent just one story of trauma, suicidal thoughts, and a now persistent feature of military life, losing service members to suicide. I'm going to stop right there. Suicide has always been a possible and very real reality for veterans of any war in
Right.
any place in the world. It's not we some of the news stuff and the way that this report is coining it, that there there was a suicide epidemic in Vietnam. There
Mm.
certainly was one following World War II, but because for so long proper statistics weren't kept and suicide was something that was shameful and pushed to the edges, not saying that it still isn't today, but I think it's a little bit less so, that we can't pretend that this is a new phenomenon. There certainly are factors in the war on terror that are unique to the war on terror, um, but
And
I
can
can't.
a civilian population that's been economically squeezed as hard as it has these last 20 years cherish its veterans, or treat it like a burden, treat them like burdens?
Yep,
Will a veteran understand themselves as a burden with pe- things are so tight and
yeah.
have gotten worse and worse.
And,
Anyhow,
something I want to study and go back and look at is I want to look at different periods post major wars. Post the Reconstruction after the Civil War, the period immediately following World War II, and I want to study what people said about suicide during that time as it pertained to veterans, because I think
yeah.
that there's a whole complex of statistics that are just waiting there to be found, assuming we have stuff that would be helpful. Getting Norman Camp's book from Lee about that, about mental health, treating mental health in Vietnam, and
How
about
about suicide culturally in say other countries too? How are they doing with it that have participated in wars? Japan might have a different look culturally. It might be not
true,
so taboo for them to
true,
be.
and
But what are ideas of what life is about is all mixed up into that.
yeah,
And if it's being a worker for enslaving and then complaining all day, or competing about who's got it worse.
yeah. Uh,
Why do what? Yeah. How have other countries been affected? How are their suicide rates? I'd be interested to know. Like
when
Australia has been involved in our wars. Are they
I know that Australia, UK, um, these are countries that sent a lot of forces to Iraq and Afghanistan.
mhm.
I want to say the UK's were even higher than ours per capita in terms of the amount that they lost. And that's not
Really
something that we usually.
suicide wise?
Um, I don't recall anything about suicides in Institute report. It was about
Right.
the human costs to our ostensible allies in fighting in Iraq, in fighting in Afghanistan, in fighting in Syria, Yemen, elsewhere. Um, but it's something we don't usually include. When we talk about American, veteran
Mhm.
suicides, it's usually just Americans. We don't take the time to understand that this was a war that our country spearheaded, and we brought our allies with us, and they sacrificed a commensurate amount of personnel to our own. But we that needs to be
Yeah,
included.
and they experience violence. They might not feel as responsible as a country as
True,
us.
true.
Maybe they could be more realistic the whole time. Maybe you could join the military looking for a place to be the bad guy.
Yeah,
I don't know. And if they're committing suicide as well, it's probably not by firearm.
true.
Say,
Because yeah, they don't have the same. cultural attachment to gun ownership that we do, especially among veterans. Um, so I would be really interested to know that. I'm sure there's probably some people I could look up that
Yeah,
might.
that's worth figuring out. Yeah, that's definitely factorable. Yeah,
Uh,
scientifically.
let's see, where was that? Okay. In a recent survey of 1,705 veteran members of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, 67% of veterans knew a post 9/11 veteran who had committed suicide, and 62% knew
Who had
um,
attempted, and
or
62%.
excuse me, who would 67 for attempted suicide and 62 for committed suicide.
Yeah,
And that was something actually we were talking about before the stream began. That I know two veterans that I served with personally who have killed themselves, and I believe you said four guys that you know.
I stopped counting at 4. I don't want to.
I don't blame you there at all, dude. Um, and but that's it's going to be a feature of that, moving forward. When units try to do reunions, when it gets a little further down the road. Granted, there are some places that already do it. Um, the MP Corps Regiment at Fort Leonard Wood has an annual convention, and their guys show up. And I wonder how much this comes up. I wonder how much they do they honor the people that have taken their lives? Is it more of a cobweb that they don't want people to see? Um, I'm sure there's probably some intergenerational issues because a lot of the guys that I'm thinking of are Vietnam veterans. Uh,
My tendency is to think of the suicides as people that would have otherwise maybe slammed a door in the moment. But I guess there's all different types of suicide. It's not only in a moment of passion. Sometimes it's a planned out, um, hopeless procedure.
True.
And I guess one must believe that it's a way out to go that way.
Well, I think that that's one of the things that people that we're not willing to discuss as upfront in that way is that a person choosing to kill themselves, to me, it's about pain. We're looking for pain relief, to whatever situation it is. And they tell themselves, I have tried this and I've tried this and I've tried this, and this is my last resort. But it's a very normal human instinct. We want the pain to end. And they arrive at a point where they don't see it ending, and they choose to do
Yeah,
what they do. And sometimes people give somewhat obvious signs. Other times it's completely out of left field. Um, and sometimes people also,
yeah,
you don't sometimes you don't end up dealing with it until years later. Sometimes you get out of the service, you get a new job, you work 15 years, and then you're going through, let's say, a divorce, something really hard, really personal, and maybe it starts bringing a whole bunch of stuff back. And again, it was 17 years ago, but that doesn't mean that you're not right there and experiencing the pain of that moment.
yeah,
And I feel like that sometimes when people think someone's suicidal, there's this tendency to talk down to them, and that, it'll be okay. You just got to let this pass. It can't
right,
hurt enough that you want to hurt yourself. And it's like those statements
right,
help no one. Those statements help no
exactly. Yeah,
one.
you got to go down there with
You do, you
join
do.
them
You have to
and
be willing to go down that rabbit hole.
and
Um,
face some dark stuff. But yeah,
and the
I think
it
philosophy could help people a lot with existentialism and what it is to exist. I think culturally we've got a lot of work to do in producing a healthy population.
true, true. Uh, Next section here. Okay, that's mostly repeat. Okay. This trend is deeply alarming. The increasing rates of suicide veterans and active duty personnel are outpacing those of the general population, marking a significant shift. Again, I don't know how significant because we don't have numbers on all the other ones, but we'll table that for a moment. Historically, suicide rates among active component service members have been lower than suicide rates among civilians. Elizabeth P. Van Winkle, the U.S. Department of Defense's Executive Director of Force Resiliency, let's come back to resiliency in a second, explained, quote, suicide rates for active component and reserve members were comparable to U.S. population rates after accounting for age and sex. The DoD reiterates that point in its annual suicide reports. However, the current rate has increased to meet the age-adjusted civilian suicide rate and has now surpassed it. That the current rate is commensurate with the civilian rate after historically being far lower ought to raise concerns. Meanwhile, suicide rates among post 9/11 war veterans surpass civilian rates. The growing crisis is especially pressing because veterans of post 9/11 conflicts are disproportionately dying by suicide compared to previous military service eras. Excuse me. Again, I get that's what the data says right now. I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that that's a fair description of what is actually what the overall data would actually show if other U.S.
If we had
conflicts
some
the same way.
charts to look at or something, we might be able to wonder about. Well, we might see some spikes
Yeah, that's a good
over
point.
the years, some like actual raw data
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than words.
I'll have to when we get done today. I'll have to check out Dr. Camp's book. There might be some stuff, some more specific stuff in there about suicides. Um, there are clear contributors to suicidal ideation, like high exposure to trauma, mental, physical, moral, and sexual, stress and burnout, the influence of the military's hegemonic masculine culture, continued access to guns, and the difficulty of reintegrating into civilian life. In addition to these factors, it is imperative that we consider the impact of the military's reliance on guiding principles which overburden individual service members with moral responsibility or blameworthiness for actions or consequences over which they have little control. There's something else that
Okay,
is very key and very different. I don't know about different about America compared to other countries, but we put a lot of moral responsibility on our people, and then for service members, it's
right.
not much more.
Yes, and we can't measure up if our service is abused.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Um, and that's something to discuss in terms of the way that our military does. It's completes its actual missions. Is that
Yeah.
when a unit loses someone to suicide, they don't go back and look at the unit and say the 66th Military Police Company lost this person. And they're saying that as an action is that the 140 people that are members of this company let this other person die. Now I'm not saying they should put that on them specifically, but they need to understand is that it's supposed to be cohesive. We're supposed to hold each other together. And when blame is shared out, it's doled out to certain individuals, the most blameworthy, as opposed to
Mm.
understanding that there's smaller amounts of blame a little bit further back. And we don't, like military, like the military justice system, that we find our scapegoat or scapegoats. They are tried, investigated, what have you, and the matter is said to be ended. It's done. It's not, we're not going to look back anymore. But there's a lot of other responsibility that needs to be acknowledged, and that has to do with us individualizing a person's moral responsibility over a collective sense of moral responsibility, that all of us, that everybody has to toe the line in that way. Now, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but we know we're Americans. We are highly individualized people. And so and
And
especially like the moral responsibility thing. We're a Christian nation. That's how we see right and wrong in a lot of ways, is singular on the one person or on a very small group.
so for a soldier to, or a service person to deal with troubles they're having, say, with their deployment,
Hmm.
psychological issues or moral issue. Well, morally, you can go to your chaplain and he can guide you through. Psychologically, though, I feel like our psychological service members are they're there to just get the service member back to the front or to their unit, not so much deal with what's wrong. Like that's not as important as the mission of getting this person back to the front.
That was
What's a psychologist's moral responsibility to dealing with these service members, or a chaplain,
mhm.
without lying?
That was something that Dr. Camp also talked about in his book, is that he saw therapists and shrinks choose to toe the company line, to
Well,
say,
they're set up
"Okay,
for failure a little bit. If
in some ways they really are. Yes, they want them to, okay, get this guy back to the front. It's okay. It's not a big deal. We have to meet mission. That's the thing. It's what we're all supposed to be doing, is we're supposed to meet mission, be ready to roll out that gate when the time comes. Um, I don't know if they just don't acknowledge what they're actually doing, that potentially sending guys back that should not be there, that they could be a danger to themselves or to others, and especially in terms of the empathy gap, is that they're just not caring. Like, this human person has been entrusted to you, even if it's only for a little 10-minute exam, and then you send them back to the horror they just came from. Why the fuck did they come talk to you at all? What was, other than a cover
right,
your ass? And we know
yeah,
that so many things in the military are like that, like the post deployment screenings that we all go through. How easy is it for somebody to just lie through the whole thing and, yep, you're cleared, you're ready for the next deployment, no problem, you're ready to go. Um, it's but it's very much part of the system, and like you said, it really is. In the military, doing psychological work, you're almost always set up for failure. It's
well,
truly about healing
it
someone.
deals with morality and existence. And if we're swearing an oath to defend our constitution, and we're understanding ourselves to be the good guys, what good does that, just swearing the oath to the constitution and being built up as thinking we're the good, what good does that do us when we're confronted with the reality of it? I feel like it'd be better to just program people to do evil if we're going to do evil out there, and then we'll get evil people doing that evil work, and but to get good people to do evil, it's going to take a toll.
Hmm.
Or even to, we might be lied to and think that pretending to believe the lie is the right thing to do. Yeah, did I derail us there?
No, no, not at all. No, so much about the military is about believing the lie. Here's
Yeah,
my new team leader, Sergeant Snuffy, and he's
yeah,
supposed to take care of me. He's supposed to
yeah,
make sure that I have the equipment I need, and that if I have
yeah,
personal issues going on, which everybody in the military does, that I
yeah,
get help for them. And that's the thing, is that I remember I told somebody long, long time ago, is like, out of every 10 army leaders, I would probably honestly trust one.
mm,
That's officers, NCOs, all of them. And part of it is just because they're so indebted to the system, they're so attached to it, that you very seldom see any of moments of humanity towards their soldiers because they just don't have it to give. They've been part of an organization that said no, humanity it's not useful for us. It's not humanity is not lethality. It doesn't neatly fit into that box. Uh,
Right. And say an infantry soldier or someone that doesn't care so much about the right and wrongness of it. I don't know where to go with this.
we can keep reading, and then we'll circle back to it if we get if we have some other thoughts about it.
Well, being exposed to the actual state of our country, or to turn the news on, I feel would be really disruptive to serving honorably and being completely like, I feel like one could still serve honorably in the military if they completely cut off everything outside of that world and were
Mhm.
focused on their unit. They could be have a fulfilling life
Mhm.
tending to their unit. Nothing. I've got buddies who they don't give a shit about the politics or
No,
anything outside of um, women and working out.
yeah,
Yeah,
it just doesn't come across to them. It's like invisible on the radar. It doesn't show up. So,
right. But making someone to feel like a good guy and then not using them as the good guy, it's gonna unnecessarily burden us.
oh,
We got to
absolutely.
be doing something good, or the lies have got to be really good, like way beyond us.
Well, it's not just the quality of the lies. It's the fact that they're quantified over so many people. That was the thing with Trump, is that I can't remember where it came from, but it's like, the more that you repeat a lie, the easier it is for people to believe. And in the military, we have groupthink. And so, okay, everybody else is just going along with it. I'm going to just go along with it. Um,
And I view that as psychological warfare, actually, because
in a lot of ways, it
of
is.
yeah, and it's not appropriate to point it at our own population.
No, and the groupthink, of course, it doesn't just extend to the military. Veterans bring that out again. Um, they're a big part of extending that of the shame and anxiety of all of that stuff.
Yeah, I wonder how morale is. I wonder about morale over these years. What
I'm
it's
sure,
like
right?
to like
I'm
with
I'm
the
sure.
internet and everything, and such a
Yeah,
divided population.
yeah. I,
Uh,
I could imagine it being really, really difficult right now. With
well,
just all.
however bad it is, we could still kick any country's ass. I think if we were invaded, actually
Yeah,
needed.
no, for actual
So
defense, yeah, but we go so much more beyond that.
yes, yes.
All right, let's keep going here. Um, if the above factors are likely true of wars, we must also examine unique elements of the U.S. post 9/11 wars that may have led to what many have called a suicide epidemic. For example, since the post 9/11 wars began, we have seen a tremendous rise of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, in warfare, significantly increasing the number of traumatic brain injuries and polytrauma cases among service members. TBIs have affected as many as 20% of post 9/11 service members, with many experiencing more than one during their career. Simultaneously, the length of the war and advances in medical care have allowed service members to redeploy after severe physical trauma. These compounding traumas contribute to worsening suicide rates as service members deploy and redeploy after sustaining severe injuries. Together, these and other factors may account for current veteran and active duty suicide rates.
Could we read that sentence again? Because it seemed together. Oh, these compounding traumas contribute to worsening suicide rates as service members deploy. Okay, together these are the factors. These and other factors may account for.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not really quite saying anything. All right.
Well, when I was on my second tour, I had everyone around me, or as I said, let me take that back. Most of the E4s, E5s, E6s were all combat veterans. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there were several of them, and they weren't all specifically in that range, but several of them who were guys that are on their third tour. And for those guys that were on trip number 3 to either Iraq or Afghanistan, you could see the weight on them as time went on. In terms of
Yeah.
personal stuff, divorces, and trying to keep in touch with your kids, if that's the situation somebody is in, and then going back and talking about the having to redeploy after having severe physical trauma, is it is true is that people, veterans, there are a lot of situations where troops, where soldiers and Marines would have ended up dying if we were still in Vietnam. But because of the improvement in medical care in a variety of ways, that people end up living through stuff that in the
Mm.
Vietnam era would have probably killed them. And then those guys, depending on where they are in their career and if they end up redeploying, they end up carrying those traumas with them. And sometimes they're traumas we don't even know about. Um,
I wonder what the Civil War veteran, when penicillin is new, because that would be also another spike of newness of, as far as people surviving the battlefields. I think that might be a bigger change. What was there? What was the Confederate soldier who lost that war? A rich man's war is poor man's fight. They came to face. Was there a lot of suicides among that population? I wonder.
that's a good question, and also is it important to point out that that the violence against Black people following emancipation during the Reconstruction period
Mhm.
was um, was pushed by veterans.
Yeah.
It's not hard to see, a veteran coming from a losing war, seeing all these people die and wounded, and whether or not they have any psychological or physical trauma, and then carrying that out against the people
Oh
that they
yeah.
blame for that
They've got
happening.
a ready, scapegoat ready. Yeah. Instead of suicides, they might have just been killing other humans. Yeah.
And
Uh,
also that our society has become a lot less forgiving in terms of crimes that way. Is that that um, I noticed that through the George Floyd protests that happened last summer, is that there were like guys bringing out paintball guns. That they would shoot people with paintball guns as they were driving by and shoot protesters. I guess whoever was counter protesting, but you know what I mean. But in the past, would that have just been a gun? Would that have been a baseball bat? That we still commit violence, but it's violence of smaller means. But in other eras, that violence would have been a lot more acceptable. It would have been a lot more, easier to pretend that I didn't just kill that Black guy because I know the cop and they were like, you weren't even here. We didn't even see anything. Um, but now it's, that the laws have made it harder to really, really hurt people. Let's hurt people a little less, but we're still going to hurt them. We're still going to
and to
do.
other them,
Yeah.
and
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Let's see. Many studies have attempted to understand the causes of suicide in the military. Nevertheless, quote, the precise cause of the increases in military suicides remains unknown. Well, there I hope nobody's waiting for that magic bullet to stop
right,
military
it's
suicides at
not
this.
it's not possible.
No,
Yeah.
no, and that's something that they kind of use that little bit of obfuscation to say, well, we don't know. We don't know what. And the thing is they do know. They know a whole list of reasons which might cause someone to do that, but it's never
Huh.
any just one thing. And I feel like
Right.
people's brains are too connected to a yes no mentality. You
It's
know,
bigger than psychology. It's on
it
the
is.
sociology
It is.
scale, and a culture's relationship with death and suicide. It might be honorable, actually honorable somewhere. Here, it's not. We kind of have an Abrahamic culture of an idea of hell and whatnot,
Hmm.
and
No,
also our place and as worker bees.
no, but suicide is it's still it's shameful. I mean, there's very few places in America where someone would not, by some portion of their peer group, be shamed because of that. Because for lots of people, psychology, period, but specifically suicide, is seen as personality weakness, a weakness of character. You know, they just didn't clench their fists and walk forward enough, and that's entirely misses the point because it there can be so many different reasons, and some people don't care. Some people, you know, it's not a thing for them. But if we're to be honest about the real metrics of what war does to a country, or what war has done to our country, those things have to be acknowledged. We have to be we can't pretend that, oh, that was shameful, I'm not gonna think about it, because it's all evidence to what this really does to people. You know, long-term warfare, uh, being a country that worships it up and down, and if you step outside that little box, that people are going to shame you for it. And it's a very hard place to be. I didn't like, for the most part, dealing with other veterans after I got out, because most of them fit way too much into this box I'm talking about.
Yeah, that people all are all over the place. Some people have a chip on their shoulder. Some people have a lot of pride, a lot of guilt. It's changed over the years as it's become impossible to believe we're the good guys. I feel in these illegal acts. It's not war. It's violence.
We've got a message here from Kat. Union
Hmm.
troops had no qualms whatsoever about killing Native American babies and women after the Civil War. You are
Yeah.
absolutely right. There
Right.
in that way, our government continued to murder people. It was just that at that point, a certain group of people got a little more protection than another group of people. It was, you know, it's a
Yeah.
modicum at best. But you
I
know,
wonder
Union
about the psychology of these Union troops who maybe they believed they were fighting for slavery or whatnot, and to then find themselves, well, it's hard to go back there. How how did they deal with the self-harm it does in doing evil? And there's definitely forces bigger than any of the individuals that want to other, say, the Native Americans, or erase their culture
sure.
and and get them white people names and whatnot. All these efforts are bigger than that Union soldier.
True, true. But you know, very much like you saw Dances with Wolves, didn't you?
Yeah.
Um,
Or Little
that
Big Man.
yeah, in that one they gave John Dunbar had a conscience. He had a you know he and his he had just left. You know, the Civil War had just ended when he got, or about to end, when he got sent out to his his spot on the
Yeah.
range out there. But
Yeah.
one
It's
thing
a
that's
little self-serving to the white man's culture, I feel,
it
if a
really
white
is.
person
No, no,
wrote that.
yeah. Dances with Wolves is definitely a white savior movie. That's absolutely what it's about. But the thing I want to point out is something that they left out of the movie. The woman that I'm trying to think, was it Mary Masterson? I'm trying to think of the actress that played she
Sure.
was the other woman that was living in the village, and that she
Yeah.
was. a white person who had been kidnapped and brought to
They
live
wouldn't
with the Sioux.
that and there's a lot of stories like that that they wouldn't have to make up.
Oh no,
There's
totally. But that was the thing, is that they weren't honest about what actually happened to her.
mhm,
So what they showed us the story of her. We had a very brief little, I wouldn't call it a montage, but the fight scene where she was taken from her family, and then
right.
she came and she lived with the Sioux nation that was
Yeah.
shown in the movie. What they did not show was that after that happened, she was actually kidnapped back from the Sioux by Union soldiers, or Union affiliated Rangers. I can't remember exactly who did it. And at that time when they kidnapped her back, they murdered her husband, who was a Sioux man.
Mhm.
They murdered
Yeah.
one of her children, and they kidnapped her other daughter as well. And then they
Yeah.
took her back. I can't remember, I think it was like, South Dakota type area, but she got drugged back to like Louisiana or something and forced into a re-education school.
Yeah.
And the rest of her life was just a horror show. Her daughter died before she did, which, um
That sounds like a much more useful story. That I didn't realize that she was uh,
yeah,
that was based off of a real person.
her name was, Marianne Parker, was her given name. But
Did they invent Kevin Costner's? And I love Kevin Costner.
I
Did
do
they
too.
invent his character?
Um, I believe so. I want to say that there was no specific story about that.
Mhm.
Uh, but they totally took it out. In terms of going
Yeah.
after that white savior mentality, by removing that, they entirely attached themselves to it. And
Right. And what does that movie? What did that movie do for our culture when it came out?
exactly, exactly. And the other thing to consider, and this doesn't have to do specifically with Marianne, but when you buy, I have an extended edition, I think, and I've watched the extended edition a couple times. And before John actually gets to his camp, what becomes Fort, I can't remember what he calls it. Um, that there's a little short scene where it's the soldiers who were there, and you have the officer that was in charge, and he's yelling out to these little caves that they had little built-in little caves in this big mound of dirt for the places for them to be, and he's calling to them and they won't answer him. They won't say a word. They hadn't been resupplied. There was a lot of really in terms of their survival there, in terms of keeping the post going, it was really difficult. But that mentality of being a soldier and being entirely defeated, there's no food, there's no support. Why the fuck do I think that this is worth it? And that really showed it. But that one scene was cut from the original movie. It was in the, like I said, in the extended release. And to me, that's a much more human showing of what war
Moment.
does to soldiers
Yeah.
than what they actually ended up showing. Now, Dances with Wolves, I think, does have some good parts to it. I don't think it should, entirely tossed aside, but it is very much a white savior, settler colonialism kind of movie with just enough humanity that we stop paying as much attention. That's
Yeah.
all that needed to happen there.
It's
So,
kind of a soothing movie for our
yeah,
country in a way.
yeah. And they were kind of honest about what was happening, about the Sioux getting put on to reservations and stuff. But all they did in the end was just, there was that panning shot of them, they're leaving the village because they know that the army is hunting for him, and they don't want the tribe to take that in. They could have showed us that. They could have showed us in maybe historical photos or a reenactment or something. What was it really like to be herded onto a reservation after this happened? But instead, we got a nice montage shot, fades back, and a little caption on the screen about this happens and the movie's over. And it's much easier to ignore than when you see it with your face. Like what happened with those soldiers is that I want you to look into the face of people who are truly defeated, people who thought they had a purpose, and it's entirely gone, and you want them to keep going. You want them to keep sacrificing. You want them to keep
Right. So maybe
ignoring their duties.
someone in Washington wrote their post down on a map, and they're there dealing with the reality of it. Yeah.
You Okay, let's go ahead and move on here a little bit. This paper explores possible causes using currently available data from the DoD, the VA, and related institutions to determine rates and numbers with as much consistency as possible. The paper also draws on secondary literature that provides analyses and insights from numerous related investigations. Finally, this paper relies on a series of semi structured qualitative interviews conducted by the author about the role of faith and morality in the lives of post 9/11 service members and war veterans before, during, and after their military careers. These interviews include stories of triumph and trauma from those in every branch of service. While some left the military unscathed, most have had to confront the difficulties of military experience. As one sailor reflected, anytime you are involved in the military, you are connected to something that is constantly doing both ill and good. It's just inevitable. There is enough moral stain in the mix that just by joining, you are going to come out stained. Um, I think that's very prescient. That understanding that certain things may not affect me, but they may end up affecting my. That there is a wide pool here of bullshit, of injuries and psychological damage, and moral judgment, moral questions that there's it really it I don't want to say pick your poison, but there are that many ways for someone to be traumatized, and we haven't even I don't think we've even mentioned yet military sexual trauma, that
Mm-hmm.
such a high portion of women and men's statistics aren't nearly as high as women's, but that this is trauma that people carry with them, and that trauma may be adjacent to other combat trauma. Sometimes for people it's just it's
I'm
the 4 year
constantly
of not
shocked
seeing.
talking to females at how prevalent that sexual assault is. I don't feel at all qualified to speak on it. I was in an all male unit, and we were pretty regularly warned to stay away from the females. Men, everything you do is sexual harassment,
Mhm.
and not just to protect them, but also to protect ourselves as well. Just don't deal with the females. So I had a very non-sexual military experience where um, there might be some peripheral sexuality of people looking at porn and whatnot, but as far as my day-to-day life in the military, that it just didn't enter. We didn't have sexual relationships. It was maybe a little more professional, maybe not professional enough here and there, but it was nice not to have to deal with that. I guess I'm lucky to be a man there.
No, it I served I served with female MPs in basic training and throughout the entirety of my time in the service, with one exception, that I had a soldier in my team that was taken because the area they were sending us in Iraq was males only, and
Mm,
my squad got attached to a Marine battalion, and the Marines don't send females to anything like that. So they essentially just cut us off, and they my soldier got transferred to a different platoon who was going to be in a different areas. Um, but that was a really big hit for me, because I was like, we should be able to have female troops doing this
yeah.
and not worry about it. We
Is
should.
sex encouraged or discouraged at all amongst? Um,
Generally it's discouraged for people to do that, but in in the efforts of full disclosure, my first wife was an MP.
yeah,
She and I met each other and got married, and that's one of the things about, you fall in love with the people you see, the people that you're
sure.
around, the situations that you're in.
Well,
And
I think of the Spartans, and they would they would rather encourage their soldiers to have sexual relations amongst each other, to love one another, and that, of course, they were homosexual relations, but to go into a battle with someone that you love, that you're
Hmm.
having physical relationships, they turned that into a well, that was a strength that was used. Um, the, we're not doing that. It seems we might be setting people up for failure if we're discouraging sex when sex could be really useful to us.
True, true, but we're still too connected to the morality play in
Right.
America of sex being bad. You
It'd
know,
have to be like a Starship Troopers kind of thing where you sign, maybe you're given a fuck buddy instead of a battle buddy, by sexual preference, and you're going to fight pretty well next. You're going to really, really care about, well, you tell me, to go out with your wife, or what became your wife. It's got to be a different bond than, as much as I love any of my dudes.
well, I mean, one thing that they end up doing is that you can't be in the same team or same platoon or anything like that. And so when that happens, usually, and especially if you get married, you'll get,
Yeah.
one of you, usually the female, will get shipped to another spot. My ex and I were lucky that um, when she was able to get out because she was pregnant with our son, and so she ended up only having to go to Iraq once, which I was really happy about. Um, but crap, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Um, but no, it was generally seemed as bullshit. If you have a relationship with somebody else, it's like it's bullshit. It's not worth people's time. I don't know why you want to date other soldiers or anything. And I can understand the social issues with all of that. But again, you fall in love with the people that are around you.
And
Um,
well, and you're in high stress times. It
that's it.
might be nice to have someone to hug nearby. Not sex so much for reproduction, but for, in a bonobo kind of,
But for comfort, you know,
comfort each
yeah.
other. Yeah, to discourage people from that, or to make it, or to not take advantage of its potential power, I think is a mistake.
I think part of the problem too is that we have um, too much shame about birth control,
Uh-huh.
because the biggest thing is when someone would get pregnant, usually on deployment. And of course, the female has to go home because she's pregnant. There's, her being out in combat it just makes no sense for anything anymore.
True.
But
Yeah.
that's a loss of a soldier. That's someone in the battle roster that will not be in a turret or behind the driver's wheel of a Humvee or something like that, and they have to end up dealing with that. Um,
Yeah, that's probably, yeah. Gay sex might be more more safe to promote against your soldiers than anything that could lead to a baby, because that's, yeah, that's not going to fly. You can't be getting knocked up and deployed.
no, no.
It's not,
Um,
that's not so useful.
but I do want to mention one thing about the environment that I was in the MPs, is that there were very few leaders that were actually willing to protect them. There are very few leaders that willing to, like you have a soldier and the skeevy guy in the platoon wants to take her out. He's the dude that has done everybody. It's, he treats women in a very specific way. And I don't know why at that moment it's like, you know what, dude, stay away from our females, all of them, stay away. Besides the bullshit is I know how you're going to treat this person, and this person is part of our unit, part of our organic ability to go and fight in this war. Don't destroy that. Don't destroy that chance for rapport that this person could have with other soldiers. But no, it needs to. Kat, you're absolutely right. You cannot stop love. And that's the big thing, is that people
Right. So,
fall.
and don't try to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think,
Um,
as our culture integrates women, it's and I mean Western culture into the military. It might be centuries or decades and decades of growing pains before we can get this right.
Yeah.
Um, I'm horrified to hear on a chain of command level how disruptive it would be to, well, what a failure it is for a leader to behave sexually towards a subordinate. How just way outside of what's appropriate, what's useful to the unit that is.
And that to me is one of the worst things that
Like
we're
if you're in love with that soldier, can you risk that soldier's life?
yeah, exactly. I mean, how far are you willing to go in taking advantage of this particular person? One particular one that I read about had to do with it was an E7 sergeant first class who was in a first sergeant position, and he was dating an E3 that was in his unit. And I'm like, dude, you no, gross, inappropriate, every direction you can look. This is not a good choice for anyone. I don't care how much you care about this person.
Yeah.
We, something needs to give. And the reason that I ended up reading about that story at all is because somebody had wrote a, kind of corrosive response piece to it. And they were talking about how disruptive females are in the unit and they do this and they do that. And it's like, hold on, buddy, that happens because your leaders don't do their fucking jobs. That happens
Right.
because your leaders don't say these women are not meat. They are our fucking teammates and you will treat them that way or you're going to have to deal with me. That's the kind of, first sergeant that I would have been if it had gone on that long. But most of them don't. Most of them see them as a pool to dip their fingers into. And here, we're talking specifically about veteran suicides. There are so many different ways that can happen. Somebody can be ostracized from their unit simply because they dated someone, broke up, and then that whoever, the male half of it, goes and tells everyone shit that they shouldn't be sharing. So, and puts them in a place where it's like, I can't fit in this group anymore because you destroyed it for me, simply
Yeah.
doing things that people do at the end of a relationship. But because of the military apparatus over the top, it makes the situation entirely different. But again, let's go back to what you and I were talking about earlier about us sending our children to fight. These are
Yeah.
kids. These are 18, 19, 20-year-old people who haven't been in long-term relationships, joined the military for whatever fucking reason. But
Yeah.
and we don't get taught.
Raging sexually, like
Yeah, yeah.
I was a horny young man. Yeah.
We
Hard
got
to
another
think about much other than sex. Yeah. And
yeah.
video games.
Got another message here from Kat. OMG, we had a last first sergeant that had a wife at home and another German wife there. I used to take calls from the wife at home. What when he's been out with the other, so twisted. No, that is a perfect example. I had a platoon sergeant that had an affair with a housekeeper when he was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, and he
Yeah.
was he was doing actual he was an SGL there, a small what the Army calls a small group leader, doing training of some kind. And ended up we were stationed then at Fort Lewis. He was going back to Leonard Wood for some kind of training thing, and it hit her up. Had said, "Hey, I'm back in town. Let's do this." That is so common, and it's just rampant. It's everywhere.
Hmm.
Cat, all kinds of cheating was going on. True, but not all was that type of fraternizing. That's
Hmm.
true. That's very true. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
among the Joes, I think it's way different than a sergeant to a private.
it
Say, you
is.
know,
There,
it's
there's a
like you don't
definite.
take money from them, you don't fuck them, you
Mhm.
don't fuck their wives, you don't treat them like you don't. You have to be willing to spend their lives.
How do you do that unless you value the life and therefore you value the relationships and you don't want to mess with them, so you leave them alone. That's
Yeah,
not part of your
yeah.
role, at least.
Maybe
So
have some professional distance. You know, it's it's not for nothing that it's in the UCMJ. That adultery is off limits, and that kind of fraternization is. It's not just like morally wrong; it's disruptive.
Yeah.
It cannot stand.
All right, let's go back, do a little more reading here. Neither the qualitative interviews nor the secondary literature and data pointed to a singular cause for increased military suicides. We talked about that a bit earlier. There are simply too many variables that may contribute to rising rates.
No shit. Yeah.
Moreover, the different roles of service members in the different branches and components, active or reserve, all present unique risk factors. An Air Force engineer would have quite a different experience from an infantryman in the Army, who would have a vastly different experience from a Navy reservist. 2012 Armed Forces Health Surveillance Center report, for example, revealed suicide rates for the Army and Marines were higher than those of the Navy and Air Force. That makes sense because those are the guys that primarily are doing boots on the ground type missions. However, it's important to note what they're talking about here with different jobs and different experiences is like it was mentioned by the guy when I first started reading the paper and talking about that he's not someone that generally would be out on a walking patrol. He just generally wouldn't. But because of the nature of the war on terror, you have MOSs, you have military jobs that are out in positions they normally wouldn't be in because for whatever the mission has to require. Like a great example is MPs, where I
Yeah.
was in Diwania, about 3 hours or so south of Baghdad. There was a good portion of the deployment we were by ourselves. There was
Yeah.
a bunch of units in the area, and we generally had to provide. I mean, somebody would come to help us at some point, and there were times later on where we did get more people. But the point,
I think you're tough and you can take that, and we can be pushed really really hard, but it's got to be worth it. One thing in common with all these across the different branches, we're all coming from the same country, and we're all, even given the red lies or the blue lies,
mm-hmm,
we've all been abused.
mm-hmm,
That's true amongst, like, as far as getting physically exhausted, I think that's different than morally and psychologically spent. I think that, yeah, you're gonna be pushed pretty hard, even if it wasn't your job, but it's got to be worth it.
yeah,
What did I accomplish? You look back at these terrible, at a hard thing, and what gets you through it is that it's worth it. Or maybe it's hopeless and you're just surviving, which, yeah, that's a place of apathy, and it's I don't think it's sustainable. We've the root, if there's a singular cause, it's that it was all a lie.
yeah,
It was for nothing. It might be really helpful to look back on those hardships and think, but you know what? At least we made the world a better place. We
we
made
did.
our country. We made our country safer.
Yeah,
We lived up to our grandfathers. Um, yeah. Anyhow.
no, we if we get disconnected from um, that community myth, we're fucked. Mentally and psychologically. Just and that being ostracized in that way can happen for a lot of different reasons, not just what we're talking about here.
Mhm.
Um, but very very important to note, though. Where was it? Attempting to identify the primary cause of increasing suicide rates would require piecing together a puzzle we can often only identify in hindsight with limited knowledge of the individual circumstances under which people chose to take their own lives. Still, it is worthwhile to lay out the patterns of factors affecting military personnel and veterans in our modern wars, as well as what factors may be unique to the post 9/11 era.
And I feel like he's really, really missing a lot by confining this to our culture.
Yeah,
Because we're
there's definitely,
humans outside of American.
yeah. No, I think that this should be analyzed next to statistics from the UK and other
Maybe
allied nations.
non-Western nation, how do African countries deal with this, or Oriental or Asian or whatever. Latin, still pretty Western. But are the how about what's other than the suicide bombers? Anyone that took up arms to come fight us, say in Iraq, how do they feel about theirs? Were they really serving their families in coming to fight us? Were they, or were they also duped? Like I know a lot of people came in from outside of Iraq to come fight
Mhm.
us. We kind of invited violence to this city.
Mhm.
How's morale over at ISIS? Are they offing themselves? Are they feeling pretty good about themselves? Are they fighting for something? I
Uh,
wonder, because it's bigger than just the violence or even the atrocities.
I don't
It
know.
has,
That's a good question though. If that the do do other military or paramilitary groups get deal with suicides in this same way? Um, I don't know.
it's worth looking into if we want to get to the bottom with what the hell is happening to our country.
It is definitely working into, and you're right there that the um it would be important to look at the incentives that people would have to come to a place like Iraq
Mhm.
and participate. Um,
Or maybe look back through, and outside of soldiers, look back in history at a culture dealing with rising suicides. When what there's got to be something.
yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a very
if
good
we're
question.
if we're actually, obviously you and I care about this, but if our country actually cares about this?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, it's worthwhile to lay out patterns, right? Rates of veteran and active component.
Okay. The U.S. veteran suicide rate per 100,000 has outpaced that of the public and reveals an increasingly severe crisis. The VA 2020 National Veterans Suicide Prevention Annual Report, that's a mouthful, reveals the suicide rate of veterans overall and adjusted for age and sex is 1.5 times that of the general population. This rate is likely a conservative one because, unlike earlier reports, the VA only counts veterans who were federally activated, leaving out reservists and National Guardsmen who were not federally activated. That is one subject that I do want to check into because I'd like to know more about that, especially where we are right now, because over the past 18 months, the National Guard has been deployed a whole bunch to a bunch of different places for a bunch of different reasons. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that they are all just dragged the fuck down right now because of how many different things they've had to deal with and handle. Um,
They've been abused. I feel it's just
I do as I
by
do as,
definition they're the National Guard. That's not
but
the international offense.
the suicide rates for them, I think, should be included in this. It absolutely the fact that they don't include reservists and National Guard who weren't federally activated is a major omission that needs to
Yeah,
absolutely
what's the
change.
point? Yeah.
Even if there's a little there's a little note to it, there's a little asterisk about some of these guys were this, at least that they're considered in the pool of it. um, because the missions aren't entirely overseas. It's not just overseas that troops can be sent for bullshit missions. One
Right.
consequence of this change is that the off-cited 21 veteran suicides per day is now about 17 per day. The current actual rate is 27.5 per 100,000, adjusting for age and sex, and still absent guardsmen and reservists, meaning the rate has grown to be about 1.5 times worse since 2005. Additionally,
How do you adjust for age and sex? I don't
um,
understand because we have two sexes in the army and in the military.
they
Veterans are two sexes.
yeah, men are. I want to say that it would probably fit into some of the normal categories about suicide. For example, that men are more likely to complete suicide, to use more deadlier means, but women are more likely to attempt suicide statistically. So I think that they're, in terms of fitting them into just your basic age categories, and sex categories in that way. I don't know that they were thinking about it any bigger than that. Um, Says additionally, of veterans age 18 to 34, the rate has increased by 76% since 2005. Now, your 18 to 34 is your bread and butter age group of the military. They are the workhorses. They are the E1, E2 soldiers that are filling sandbags and carrying heavy equipment and stuff. It's your junior NCOs, possibly even occasionally a senior NCO,
Yeah.
depending on how long they have been in. And so, for it to be that much more in the younger bracket, yeah, that's it's fucking awful. I don't have better words for it. Um, let's see what's the next thing here. While the suicide rate of the general population has grown 1.3 times the 2005 rate, the increases are not commensurate with those of veterans overall, and certainly not with more recent younger veterans of the post 9/11 wars. In total, there were 89,100 confirmed U.S. veteran suicides between 2005 and 2018, including veterans of the global war on terror and also previous wars such as the Vietnam War. The VA began tracking suicide rates among veterans in the mid 2000s and has not released current rates or numbers beyond 2018, despite publishing annual reports since 2005, estimating an average of 6,364 veteran suicide deaths per year. The total number between 2005 and the present day is likely closer to 95,460.
Averaged in that way, it's not very useful. That we need to look at a chart and see if there's been spikes over that time or
Sure,
if it's been a
sure.
gradual.
But I do think um, some of it is rather cursory, but I do think one thing here is important, and that is for us to just look at just comparing these numbers to everyday things. Um, I want to say there's about 400,000 people in Portland, Oregon, where I live. This is saying that almost a quarter of the population of Portland killed themselves from following service in a war.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people need to. I think that's really instructive. That it's so often that we look at things in terms of a rate. Like we were saying earlier. Based on age and sex. But when you look at hard numbers like this, 95,460 human beings killed themselves after
Yeah.
coming back from a war. We're not talking about KIAs. We're not talking about guys that were killed or wounded physically in service. These are guys that came home, that made it home, and ended their lives at some point after that. And I think that we should think about that. I think
Yeah.
that there's times where it's we throw around numbers and again if we were back in 1975, 50 what was it, we lost 58,000 people, 58,000 troops in Vietnam, KIA. That this is two-thirds of that. It would be very different for them looking at their war in this metric. But I would imagine that if we were to go back to, let's say, 1975 to now and actually punish the honest suicide rates for Vietnam veterans, we would be dealing with 500,000, 600,000, considering how many million troops served there and came home, and that the VA and other government organizations just haven't covered it. They haven't gone back and looked at that. Um, and I mean, I understand that it's difficult to do, but it's not undoable. I mean, the Watson Institute puts out stuff like this very often. Um, it,
Yeah, we've changed. Our whole world has changed since 2005 too. We got to be able to look for catalysts or spikes, or when did this really start taking off, and has it been a straight, has it been constant, have there been waves of suicide connected with maybe social media stuff, with the rise of Facebook? And
it's possible. It's very possible. It's just, it's all about, if you have the data. Um, that was something that Lee mentioned when we talked to him, is that the reason that Norman Camp got to write the book that he did was because another shrink, in complete rejection of the orders he was given by his superiors, kept his files on his patients. And because he did that, there was information that could be used out of that. They were told to burn it. And think about how many guys, got these cursory little checks in Vietnam for their mental health. We could have a stack of 1 million files in front of us if people had actually held on to them and stuff like that hadn't been got rid of. But the shame quotient definitely needs to be acknowledged here. They wanted to hide it. They wanted, they
well, what if there's a catalyst for these suicides that hurts someone's bottom line?
mm-hmm, absolutely.
What if there's some economic correlation to money going to these people with an uptick of the consequences, which is our population offing itself?
See, that's one of the goals I have with doing things like this and working on the podcast, is that I want it to be so ugly for future US leaders to choose to send kids to war. I want it to be, it needs to
It better
be,
be worth it. Yeah.
it needs
Especially
to
when
be,
we're the most powerful thing on this planet.
exactly.
Yeah.
That it we can't pretend that it's not there. But if people won't acknowledge Iraqi lives or Afghan lives or any other marginalized people we happen to go and drop bombs on, can they at least empathize with fellow Americans? Can they at least see that, okay, I am voluntarily sending all these kids to get PTSD, to
Right.
receive
Thank
traumatic
you for
brain
the
injury?
service that you might kill yourself for in a
Yeah,
few years. We've
and
got these cultural virtue signals of,
yeah,
I support the troops. What
yeah,
are you
yeah,
doing?
exactly. Instead of actually, I tell people, don't thank veterans for their service. Ask them about their service. Tell me about your service. What did you do? And they may be uncomfortable with some of it and not want to share it, and that's okay. But it should not be a blanket. Okay, I did my obligatory honorific thing here. I honored the veteran, and now I can go on with my day. I
It
it's so
often freedom, if something doesn't feel free, it loses its will to live too.
true.
And I think our freedoms have been eroded over time. Oh, I mean, what has happened since 2001 as far as violations to sacred American values like free speech? That's screwed.
Got a comment here from Kat. 25 miles from Fort Huachuca. Lots of old vets retired here. So no, that should never happen with a local paper.
Mhm.
Do you recall what she's mentioned about the paper? I'm drawing a blank here at the second.
I'm waiting for understanding.
Okay. Also from Kat, I think all the rates are definitely underreported. The same paper tried to sensationalize and question an obvious vet suicide as a possible suspicious death for 3
Yeah.
days even.
Well, I
Um,
think, yeah, Kat might be speaking to the fact that it's this, the reality of this is being spun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, and that some of this stuff is things that have very gradually improved in the fallout from what's happened at Fort Hood and the murder of Vanessa Guillen. That because I remember initially reading that story, and I say to myself, where are her leaders? Where are the people that are supposed to be checking on her? And she was an armorer. Now, if I'm the armorer in COIC, the guy in charge, I'm going to make sure at the end of the day I put eyes on all my soldiers. I know where they are. Hey, I'm going home. Cool. No, but
It's your
no,
ass if you don't.
exactly. And so she just vanishes, and no one does anything. They just assume, oh, I guess she's AWOL. Whatever's going on. Sensitive female or whatever bullshit they happen to throw out there. But who actually tried to find out? Because I remember talking when it talked about this in the podcast, is there was a point that afternoon when she was murdered, when there was a huge crime scene in that arms room down there, and had one person, one soldier or NCO walked into that arms room and seen it, there was no more hiding it. There would be no more. But that guy got the time to clean all that shit up because he was alone, because Vanessa went to a place where most soldiers don't go unless we're drawing weapons or we're cleaning weapons. And a lot of Army training doesn't require that. It was, they're down in basements. Army bases have, or posts have horrible records with surveillance in terms of security, in terms of actually watching what's happening on their base. And
Yeah.
and I'm like, and eventually they did fire all the NCOs that were in their chain of command. I don't know how many of them actually got into trouble. I don't know how many of them actually said this was on you and you didn't do what your duty. But that's my problem and not the military's, because that's how I look at duty. That's not how the military teaches us to look at duty. It's about, we do the bare minimum. We do maybe a little more if someone's watching, but that's it. It wasn't, no, 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 I didn't have anything to do with that. Why would you blame that on me? Because you're her fucking sergeant. You were supposed to be there and you chose not to, and now she's dead, murdered by a fellow soldier. So I
Mhm.
got into a bit of a tangent on that, but in terms of discussing all of this, in terms of trust of leadership and all that, that it's not
I
there.
think it
It's not
rots from the top. If people are unaccountable from the top down,
Mhm.
it works its way down over time, and we're going to end up with a pretty messed up military if we don't
No, I think that's how it's always been.
punish
Yeah.
criminality,
Yep.
vast criminality. Okay. Are we almost at the end of this article, you think? Oh, it goes on to 35 pages.
It
Right.
does. I'll after the finish this paragraph, I'll start skimming. We'll cut it down a little bit. Um, it says most of today's veterans did not participate in post 9/11 conflicts. About 3.764 million veterans, 21% of the more than 18.2 million veterans in the U.S. today, served after the September 11th, 2001 attacks. If the percentage of veteran suicides were the same for post 9/11 veterans as for all veterans, then post 9/11 veteran suicides might total 20,370. However, for various reasons, which this paper explores, suicide rates are much higher for post 9/11 veterans, particularly
Mhm.
those in the 18 to 34 age group, rising from an average suicide rate of 32.3 per 100,000 between 2005 and 2017 to 14.9 per 100,000 in 2018. Therefore, we can conservatively estimate the number of suicides among global war on terror veterans to be about 22,261. Even at these conservative numbers, they are triple the 7,057 service members who have died during global war on terror operations. Moreover, the current suicide rate of 45.9 veterans among 45.9 among veterans 18 to 34 is about 2.5 times the suicide rate of that of the adjusted population, which is 18 per 100,000. So yeah, look, from 18 per 100,000 to 45.9. I mean, it's among the specific age bracket, but How fucking horrifying is that? I
Yeah.
mean, I, all right, let's skim through here and we'll find some stuff we haven't talked about. We talk about it's been called an epidemic of soldier suicides. You got that right. Um, Oh, here's an important one. The DoD and others have maintained, apart from 2012, the suicide rates adjusted for age, sex, and population are almost the same between active duty service members and those of the general population. They can no longer argue this since the number of suicides and the rate have become worse in recent years, as 2018, 2019, and 2020 have consecutively marked the worst years of active service member suicide since the previous peak year in 2012. Um, Two important things to mention this. Number one, 2012 was the peak of the war in Afghanistan. So it makes sense that there was a huge peak during that particular time. 2018, 2019, and 2020 are all years where Trump was our president. And I started thinking about that, and this was during the time when General Soleimani was assassinated by a cruise missile. I don't know about you, but if I were still in uniform during this time, I would have spent those particular years being absolutely terrified that I was getting ready to go and fight in Iran. Um, I clicked you off for some reason. I'm sorry. I don't know why. Um, I'm not hearing you. Say something again. No, I don't know. Here, I will. I'll disconnect you. Just click the link again, and we'll see if it'll fix it for us. Sorry, everybody. Had a Boots got kicked for some reason, but um, I'll mention this when he comes back on. But the threat of war with Iran was absolutely palpable during those particular times. I know because I was living it too. I told this to Danny when we started covering those things. Is that, dude? I can't tell you how terrified I am that our country is about to march into another unwinnable, unneeded, unimportant to American interests war. Well, certain American interests, I should say. Um, and I'm guessing that troops are feeling that as well because during the war in Iraq, we all wait. We weren't sure that maybe Bush was going to send us to Iran too, and that was there were bumper stickers around that had the little letter ticking off it, and it spelled IRA, and the Q was leaving and the N was arriving. Like, next in line, here's what we're doing. And so I'm guessing that had a big impact on service members' mental health during that time, just not knowing what the hell was going to happen and knowing that it was going to be an awful war if it did.
Hey there. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure why I did that. So, anyways, what I was mentioning about Iran is that I know for me that my fear was absolutely palpable during the time when Soleimani was killed, that we were getting ready to go and fight in Iran, and
Mhm.
you have the counterattack, the response attack that came from Iran that hit Al Assad air base and out in the western Iraq. Um, I think the news said that there were 30 people that got Purple Hearts for TBI injuries from those attacks. And so none of those troops, probably none of, I don't know if any of them got sent home, but imagine everybody lives, but we all still have to live with the reality of almost being killed. We didn't come quite as close, but we're still damaged from it. That was
Mhm.
what the fallout was from that. And I expected more. Like I said, I was terrified that was going to be the next step. And I'm so thankful that it wasn't. I don't didn't trust Trump as far as I could throw him, especially in terms of making a simple decision in that way. Um, but I think that was one major component of those years where their suicide rates were much higher than they were at other times. Let's see. See, I don't know about the accuracy of this. That It says active duty suicide rates have decreased during wartime in every U.S. war besides Vietnam and the global war on terror. I think that is from lack of reporting. I think that is from people not coming forward. It's not because, or not people
Well, they
coming.
didn't start collecting suicide information to the mid 2000s, so
Yeah.
it's kind of
So,
not sayable.
yeah, we're not dealing with accurate studies of any of these other times, and so I think people should treat this as very skeptical if you if you're inclined to believe that. Okay, so here we have our hostile death rate from the war. We have our first peak, or one of our first peaks over here when you and I were there in 2004. And then we have the other one at the height of the surge in 2007. So by their metrics, I'm not seeing, I guess there's a little more of a point over here
That
near,
kind of connects it to spikes in violence, as though that's
yeah.
an important factor. But I think
Well,
the psychology is much more important than the
yes.
violence. Like, I feel like we can do violence,
Yeah.
or
And then
behold it.
we also have another peak over here, and this is with corresponds to 2012 when the peak was in the Afghan war, and that's specific about adjusted active duty suicide rate. But over here, here's civilian, and here's military. Excuse me, this is military. This is veteran. So civilian, veteran, military.
I can't see what you're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. My pointer isn't here. So, okay. So we have our hostile death rate is the dotted line. The solid black line is the adjusted veteran suicide rate. The
I see no lines, my friend. Perhaps you need to
oh,
share the screen.
that's what I didn't do.
That
Oh,
okay, all right. I could nod my head with a little more confidence now.
okay. Kat, that's true about that. Family members sometimes cover up situations like that. That's a very good observation. Okay, sorry about that. So we have our dotted line here for our hostile death rate, guys actually dying during operations. We have our double line here, that is the adjusted active duty suicide rate. You have this solid line, which is the adjusted veteran suicide rate, and then this hash line is the age adjusted civilian rate. So just the obvious difference there. And you have a couple places like with this solid line and the hashed one between civilian rates and veteran rates, that we've always, all their data is far above it. We don't, if their data is accurate, at no time from 2005 to the present did we ever have a rate that was commensurate with the civilian rate, which is the VA's line. That's what they tell everybody. It was in several articles that I read about the specific topic, that they are, the veteran active duty and veteran suicides are commensurate with the civilian rate. That's it. That's their fucking explanation. But it doesn't accurately show what this is, and the numbers absolutely bear it out. All right. Let's see. Rates and figures by the DoD and other sources may be prone to data error. Yeah, I figured
no shit. Yeah.
that. Even counting all deaths, including hostile and non-hostile incidents in the global war on terror, which totaled 7,057, there are more than triple the number of post 9/11 veteran suicide deaths. Um, Adding the estimated 5,116 active duty personnel who died by suicide, the 1,193 National Guard service members, 1,607 Reserve Component service members, between 2011 and 2020, to the conservative estimate of 22,261. And so, and it says that's not even accurate. That it has to be down here with 30,000. That is the much more accurate thing. And the thing is that if this was still peacetime, there would certainly still be active duty suicides, but there probably wouldn't be nearly as many National Guard or reserve member suicides. How can they justify saying that it's simply commensurate with rates when you look at these people that they weren't in the active army? They were only, on active
And
duty.
who wants to say
Yeah.
that? You
Oh,
know,
absolutely. No, it is an ugly thing to say, but it's the reality. But yeah, no, they don't want to. They want to, they want to just hide behind the statistics and say those aren't accurate. Uh,
because dealing with the problem might not it might
yeah.
not be financially worth it.
Um, it is worth mentioning, even with today's alarming high rates, military suicide rates are still lower than in much of the pre-World War II era. One may speculate the reason for this is the massive growth in understanding and identifying and treating mental health issues in the last better part of a century. It is likely also a matter of scale, as the military is significantly larger today.
Where
Um,
does pharmaceuticals tie in?
that's a good question. That's a very good question.
You can't take that out.
Yeah. Improvements in life-saving medical practices, protective equipment, and strategies that limit boots on the ground to prevent physical injury simply keep more service members alive and often unscathed. Such advances in both mental and physical health illustrate why suicide rates may be lower today by comparison to the pre-World War II period. That said, the data of
Well,
available,
those were really depressing times,
yeah, yeah,
like economically, and people were there was hopelessness, but
absolutely,
there weren't any antidepressants.
no, no, and I
You think with if antidepressants were a benefit to our culture, that they would have worked, or that we wouldn't see. I wonder if there could be a tie between those and suicides.
well,
Fucking with the mind chemistry like that.
I was in Norman Camp's about doing his work in Vietnam. He mentions that the Vietnam era is the first time that there were American pharmaceutical options for psychological treatment. It was, we didn't have any of that in World War II, and it's older stuff. It's the tricyclic stuff. Your uh, nortriptyline and things like that. Stuff that I've taken at different times. But the problem is that they give it, and it happened in the war in Iraq too, because I saw it happen with my own guys. That we send people to mental health, they're given pills, and they're sent away. And
And there's money attached to those pills too, with government contracts, and it's not just for nothing these are ending up in front. It's not just medically. I feel like that these are being pushed on people. I feel like someone's making a big buck, whether it's about that or not. Someone's making a big buck.
well, it really depends. I know I don't know in terms of like the military pushing pills, knowing that it'll keep more people,
Well,
in
it helps you treat a symptom if you can't deal with the cause, which is this is all bullshit. For example, plus family members themselves make outright.
well the I part of it is that um, mental health medications can help with certain symptoms, but there are times where the body has is doing things that aren't within our the control of our psyche.
Sure.
We can't. And the thing about that I tell people about taking pills like that, because I take a couple different ones, is that you're supposed to find something that helps you take a bit of the edge off. Like if we were just thinking of in terms of mental pain, if you're not so anxious, if you're not so depressed, but it's not going to be a catch-all. It has to. If you
Yeah.
if you have serious issues, you need to talk to someone. Like you said, you need to deal with the root causes of what's happening. But at times you can't. I
Right.
as an example with my pain is I can't I can't deal with the root causes any more than I already am. But taking those meds does help my day to day. It makes it so that I can, do stuff like this, like us chatting. Um, but I do think it's important that we talk about the reasons that pills get pushed first and then people don't get watched with it, because I think that happens a lot with in America too. In the civilian population, you go to a doctor,
Yeah.
you ask for pills, you're given the pills, and then but it's your regular doctor. You're not going to come back with them for specific sessions. You may not go back and check in with them for a couple months, and you could become, meds can make people suicidal. It can make them extremely anxious. You have to be monitored in doing that. And so if pills are pills can never be the solution, but I think they can be part of the solution if doctors are attentive with it and that we understand the root reasons. But
I think they could also be a part of the problem if we're seeing an uptick in the use of these and an uptick in suicide.
true,
Our population is getting less mentally healthy.
it's possible,
Um,
but I don't think there should ever be a blanket, don't use, don't take these meds, don't you
it
just like.
is a difference between our generation of veteran and what's come before, our so-called advances in mental health.
Mhm.
But I don't know if we can call them advances if we're doing worse.
Sure.
It's it's definitely, it shouldn't be isolated out of, wondering what's going on. So, like, what are our psychologists doing?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Well,
you can like numb yourself out. One can use alcohol and not feel
you
and
can.
never and
See, that's one aspect of with taking pills, that there's a point of numbness where you need to
yeah.
stop, where, because the med is not, it's not letting you still respond to your environment. It just makes it so you don't care, you don't give a crap. And
Yeah.
that can happen to a lot of people, and that does need to be acknowledged, definitely.
I think
Um,
it's a piece of the puzzle.
okay, I am. Let's see. Now they do mention in here. I'm gonna skip over most of it, but they do mention about that because our war dealt specifically with IEDs and with a huge uptick in traumatic brain injuries compared to the Vietnam era. That makes it definitely individualizes the conflict in that way in a much more clear.
I don't think it's really sayable to compare the effects, like the shockwave effects of artillery on an older battlefield.
It
Even
is
even
very hard to compare. Yeah, yeah.
even using our own explosives, you set a claymore off. There's that shockwave. You need to be underneath it.
Oh,
Psychologically, it was really. I don't know if I ever left IEDs behind, and anytime I get in my vehicle, to be driving around with that kind of danger where you're helpless. It seemed
mhm.
to me, I felt helpless against IEDs. Um, but yeah,
No, and they that
rattling heads happens at war.
that's actually something they mentioned in here too. I don't recall the section, but I can paraphrase a little bit. That because we dealt with so many IEDs, there was an ever present notion of doom.
Uh-huh.
That you didn't. There was never a time when you didn't feel vulnerable, because
I think that's
they.
on a battlefield in World War II, say too, or World War One, where just being near the front line, say getting shelled to shit, um, that's going to be a lot of an IED is not going to be one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. It's going to blast and ring your bell, but it's not like a barrage, like an artillery barrage. I feel would be more devastating outside of the shrapnel as far as the vibrations go.
I think that that's a good point. The what they've seen so far statistically is that the in terms of the traumatic brain injury comparison, that statistically speaking, guys fighting in Vietnam or guys fighting in World War II had
Yeah.
a lesser chance for a traumatic brain injury. But in our
I
situation,
wonder if that's true, though. I mean, there's nothing. They're improvised explosives devices that, first of all, they're not one thing. They explode, and explosions
but
rock us badly.
there's also the repeat effect that like we talked about earlier, is that because of medical advances, because of improvements in how they treat combat trauma, that a person can get their bell rung and then get treated, get checked for concussions, and then get sent back out, and then you have the chance for repeat trauma. Let's say that person did have a concussion but they were sent out before they were supposed to, they get hit again, and then you have compounding injuries. I think that that's more of the more of the gist in terms of comparing ours to theirs, is that if something that bad happened to somebody with artillery in World War II, would they have had a repeat situation that was close enough to duplicate those conditions and compound an existing injury? I'm sure that it did happen, but like you said, how do we statistically look at that? How do we compare that accurately? I do agree with you. That getting hit by artillery, even if you live through it, could be significantly worse than an IED. But it also depends. Some IEDs are very sophisticated. EFPs, those explosive formed penetrators, can do serious damage to very armored vehicles. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the armored vehicles themselves suck and aren't really that armored. They're armored just enough, which is something I want to talk about in the future, about the shittiness in that way, strikers and Humvees and such. Um, but that compounding thing, I saw something just a little bit ago where it talked about that they screened 150 veterans, and they said that that some people got hit who had got hit by at least one IED. There was people that got it as few as two, and there was a dude who had gotten hit 18 times. Now, I'm sure that there's some variance in there. Some of them were probably not as severe as others, but to be to have your life be threatened to be burned out 18 different times, that's
Yeah.
a huge burden to carry, in addition to whatever physical symptoms that would provide. Now, again, we're not saying
Mm-hmm.
that soldiers who were clearly in need of care in past wars weren't sent back out into the field. They absolutely were. What I just mentioned about the pills in Vietnam is that was something that Dr. Camp specifically mentioned in the book, was um, that this new aspect of psychological treatment is being used to shove people back out to the front because now they have pills and the pills are going to save them, as opposed to actually
Yeah.
seeing what's going on with this guy. Because there would be times they'd send guys back to their units and they'd kill someone, they'd kill a buddy, they'd kill their commander. I mean, this entire subject plays a huge part into fragging. That all
Yeah.
that happened during Vietnam, and a little bit of it happened in Iraq, although not nearly in the same kind of numbers. Um, but and so you have this one soldier, and especially let's say, with that dude with the 18 hits, the 18 IED hits, what number deployment is he on? Two, five? I mean, and it depends too. Special forces guys get sent on more deployments, but they're usually shorter. But that doesn't mean that each individual thing didn't compound and stack up like huge fucking horrible pancakes over your head. Um, so, but no, there have always been excuses to send people back to the front, whatever the front happens to be, or back to duty when they're not ready for it. And I don't know that
Uh-huh.
we'll ever get around that, because we're supposed to trust our leaders, and our leaders get to choose what's best for us. And you and I, we're trying to, that our understanding of humanity and caring for our fellow soldiers means we want to be there for them, to understand them. If they get hurt, we're there with them. That's not how most people think. That's not how most soldiers think. Most of us are just barely outside of caring for ourselves, especially if you're in a unit of assholes, and people don't treat each other well. That's neither here nor there, but it's just something popped in my head. So, um, dude, we've been talking for, where's my timer? It's up here somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Do
That's
you
a
feel
long time contemplating suicide.
It is. It is. You feel like talking a little bit more? Should we wrap it up for today, and we can either come back to it or just move on to chatting
I
about
think
something else?
I think
We
we've got some worthwhile thoughts to figure out, like how are other cultures doing with this. And yeah, I'm all done. I've been up since 4.
No. Yeah. I get you. I get you. Um, Give me one sec here. Um, so I think we're going to wrap it up for today, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here, for joining in the conversation. I especially want to thank my friend for taking the time to sit down and talk about this. That he found it very important too, and that I hope we've contributed to a good discussion of these kind of things. Um, Thanks, Deborah. Um, so I have one little thing that I want to mention here before we are done for today, and that is my friend Danny. You guys know Danny. Um, he has a new article out, and I'm going to share it here real quick. It is called Manufactured Mission: The Iraq and Syria Forever War Factories. It came out on the 1st. It is a really good um, breakdown of what happened with the recent Biden administration strikes on militias in Iraq. Please definitely give it a read and check it out if you want to know more about what's happened and the history about it in a bigger way. And essentially, it's just absurdity. It's just yeah, it's just absolutely absurd and makes no sense. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stream today. Please, like, review, share. Um, Thank you, Kat.
Disagree. I love disagreement and
No,
help us fine
disagreement is good.
tune.
Um,
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kat. That's something that I acknowledge a lot with my life, with the physical pain I have, is that I got home. I made it home. I get to sit here with my friend and talk about this kind of thing, and I know that I'm it, I'm lucky in that way that I did, and other people aren't so lucky. But I want to try to speak for them. I want to try to get out there and let people know that there is a lot more to know here about being in the military, about going into combat, than most people ever truly consider. So I thank you guys for being here, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.